A lot of younger Australians don't think much about aged care. Let's be honest, if they do think about growing old, it's usually dreaming of a comfortable retirement when they can stop working and tap into their superannuation, not necessarily what their aged care might involve. But that superannuation we're all contributing to could end up being critical to the sort of aged care we ultimately receive. The government's been grappling with how to properly fund aged care to fix the problems identified in a recent Royal Commission report and to accommodate the demographic bulge of baby boomers moving into their senior years. This week, the final report of the government's Aged Care Taskforce was released. It's recommended more user pays. Those who can afford to do so should pay more. Exactly who pays and how much, well, that's now up to the government to decide. One thing it won't be doing is imposing a Medicare-style levy on all taxpayers to fund aged care. The Taskforce report also ruled this out on the grounds it wouldn't be fair to younger generations. So, is this the right approach? And what sort of aged care can we expect in the future? Welcome to Insiders on Background. Thomas Walker was a member of the Taskforce report, the youngest member in fact, specifically chosen to bring a Generation Y perspective to this aged care debate. He's lead economist at Think Forward, a researcher and advocate for intergenerational fairness. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Look, thanks for joining us. And I am keen to get a better understanding of how this task force arrived at its recommendations. But first, how did you get involved in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm an economist and a millennial, and with some colleagues, we founded an organisation called Think Forward to advocate for intergenerational care in Australia's economic and tax policy making. That's because we see that there's a lot of challenges that younger generations are facing, which are sort of related to how our tax and economic systems operate, whether it's, buying a home or starting a business or getting an education. And we also have this aging population time bomb sort of coming down the pipeline towards us. And with you sort of see this in the intergenerational report. It sort of talks about how there's going to be these huge economic pressures on younger taxpayers in the coming generations. So I've been going to Canberra and advocating on these sort of issues and these ideas of sort of intergenerational care and fairness in policy making. And then one day I got the call from the Minister Annika Wells asking whether I'd like to participate in a task force she was setting up to make recommendations to the government around how they should fund aged care going forward.
Because you had this Royal Commission report saying a levy was the best way to go on all taxpayers, as I mentioned. The two Royal Commissioners were in fact a little divided on exactly how the levy should apply. But generally they felt everyone should kick in to help boost aged care funding. It was pretty clear early on the government didn't want to go down this path. And I guess what they look to you as a voice who might make that point on the task force as well.
Well, I think the minister was very keen to have a really broad diversity on the task force, whether that's from within the sector, so providers, users, hospitals, unions and the workforce, but then also diversity in terms of across generations. And I think that's was a really amazing thing that was done on the task force to make sure that that's perspective from First Nations people or workers in the sector or young people like myself to try, if we're going to pursue these really big reforms for the decades ahead, to have those broad perspectives was really important, particularly when the Royal Commission had recommended some sort of levy or tax on incomes, which was then going to mean that as younger workers, we're going to be paying this levy on our incomes over the coming decades to fund the aged care of older Australians who, in my belief, had already been set up really well through the superannuation system, through tax concessions on property, which had enabled them to build wealth to help fund their own sort of retirements and aged care.
But just on that, so, I mean, we all as taxpayers fund Medicare, we all fund the NDIS, not to mention things like defence and so on, but why shouldn't aged care be evenly funded amongst all?
I think as a principle that's really good, and it's important to remember that their recommendations are just asking for a contribution. Most of the funding will still come from taxpayers. We'll all contribute to aged care, whether we use it or not. It's just that there's a recognition that with a declining working age population and an increasing population who are older and not working and are not paying tax, that it would be intergenerationally inequitable if we were to put all the costs of a levy on people who are still working and people who are retired and have wealth weren't contributing at all. So it's just trying to even up those two things a little bit. So older people with wealth contribute and people still contribute through the tax system without there being a levy towards aged care costs as well.
I mean, and you touched on this just before, but you think younger generations have missed out on the benefits of superannuation and property that some of the older generations have enjoyed.
It's not that we've missed out because we haven't got to retirement age yet. I think the concern is that there's a growing intergenerational wealth gap where previous generations have had the opportunity to buy property, use the tax system to put lots of money into their superannuation accounts, which is the system as designed working, like people building nest eggs and wealth to pay for their retirement. But with the housing crisis and things like declining real wages and tens of thousands of dollars of HECS debts, so young people are sort of starting behind the eight ball before they even get into the workforce, that ability to build wealth and a nest egg for retirement, I think, is going to be harder for younger generations than it has been for, say, the generations that came before us.
And are you able to say, through the task force deliberations, which went for about 6 months, I think, was there much pushback, debate over this, or did you find everyone pretty much agreed with your view that it shouldn't be a levy on all taxpayers?
So there was definitely debate around it. We were very fortunate in that we had like the power of the Treasury behind us, and we had lots of data and statistics to look at. So we'd get lots of background briefings around looking at how the superannuation system's maturing, like it's been around for 40 years now. So people are reaching sort of 80, 85 with super balances and much larger super balances than before. We've looked at data around inheritances and how they're going to quadruple over the next few decades. So people are building up wealth and then not actually spending it in retirement and passing it on to their family or children. And of course, a lot of data around that burden on younger taxpayers. There's going to be less of them compared to more older people. So it was a decision very much based around the data and the statistics we were given. And there was debate around whether it was the right thing to do. But I think we came to a unanimous position that given, the data and the statistics around the economic situation facing young people, that a levy would be inequitable when there's other ways we could get more money.
Well, just on, so those other ways, I guess this is the big question a lot of people have now, something for the government to decide. But in your mind, how should it apply? Not every older Australian has, stacks of wealth in their super or property and so on. So where do you draw the line? How does this go to work? Very clear in the recommendations is that we believe there should be a strong safety net. Like we know that not everyone will have wealth to draw down on when they reach 70, 75, 80 and might need the aged care system. So ensuring that there's that safety net there is really important. We've also talked about how the government should absolutely fund the majority of care costs. So no matter who you are, you can get amazing care services to support you as you get older. And in terms of the contribution, we looked at a whole range of different scenarios for different people based on wealth, and I'm sure the government's still reviewing where those settings will be. But I think the task force recommendation was something around looking at the age pension test.
Correct.
Is basically a model as to who should or shouldn't be paying for aged care.
Yeah, so a full pensioner will be covered by the safety net, and they will make less of a contribution to the aged care sector than someone who might have investment properties or a large superannuation account. So
and a part pensioner maybe somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's a progressive sort of system. So the more you have, the more you're asked to contribute. But again, it's worth noting that the biggest contributor is still by far the government. This is just a contribution that people will be making.
And you would have seen some of the figures people are speculating this week, $100 a week, $200 a week. I mean, do you have any figures in mind, or is that still unclear?
That I believe that's still unclear, David.
Okay. And the other big question, what does it pay for? Is it the extras like better meals, a glass of wine, Netflix streaming service, or is it that's going to benefit the individual, or is it a contribution that's going to benefit everyone, including those who aren't paying the extra?
The hope is it benefits everyone. That's the ambition. We came into the task force with this understanding that the number of people who need aged care is going to grow, but just as importantly is that the quality of the care provided needs to be much better. Like we saw through the Royal Commission process that a lot of the sector wasn't up to standard, and a big reason for that is there just isn't enough money or funding going into the sector, and we let it go for too long in terms of the quality in it, and now it's time to sort of put more money back into the system to improve quality for all. So that's it doesn't necessarily exacerbate a two-tiered system where the wealthier older Australians are going to end up with a Rolls-Royce service compared to everyone else. This is about lifting all boats. Correct. Yeah, there's a flaw that everyone should have access to high quality aged care services. And then if you want to have a really nice accommodation in like a beautiful parkland and have wine with your dinner, then there's an opportunity for them to contribute more. But I think that reflects our journey through all of life. Like as long as we have a really good access to accommodation and care and food, then if you want to spend more money on extras, then you can. But with that,
which you can do
coming
at the
back
moment.
to that everyone should have access to that high quality basic sort of minimum standard of care.
And will this extra funding that comes through this system, and this is an interesting question here too that's come up, will it go towards making the providers more profitable? A lot of them are running at a loss.
Yeah.
But this is a tricky one. People don't often feel great about big profit making in aged care. So how's that going to work? Will some of this money help the profits, help the bottom line of the providers to attract a bit more investment into the sector?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question and something I thought about a lot coming into the task force. You sort of read the Royal Commission report and you're like, can we trust this sector to make things better if we just give them more money? And I think that's a valid question, and something we talked about a lot on the task force is they need more investment and funding to enable them to provide better services. Like the way it's currently working, where they're loss-making, means the providers are just struggling to get by and not investing in better services and setting their retirement homes or villages up for the future. And I think we've been really careful to make sure that there's really good transparency around where people's monies are going. It's well regulated. There's really strong reporting requirements to make sure that providers, the ones that are sort of for profit, because many are not for profits, the ones that are for profit are making a reasonable return for the purpose of improving their services into the future, and that they can't grab hold of people's monies and pocket it as profit, basically.
A reasonable return.
Exactly.
Look, one of the things I'm keen to hear your thoughts on is the family home, because you're all about intergenerational equity, and it's a really interesting perspective. Yet the task force has basically said don't change at all the way the family home is treated in the assets test, which is it's a very light touch at the moment. I think, less than $200,000 of the value of the home is assessed in the means test. So, if you've got a home worth $500,000, it's treated the same as a home that's worth $5 million. Surely that isn't fair, given younger Australians have missed out on the property boom, as you point out. Why isn't the family home being the way it's assessed being changed here?
To me, it's about that's sort of about values and like respecting almost the sanctity of the family home in Australian culture. Like there's wealth in superannuation and investment properties that the recommendations are saying that perhaps that's where we should look for contributions from people who have those assets without needing to bring the family home into it.
There's a lot of wealth tied up in family homes. I mean,
there is.
Multi-million-dollar properties aren't rare these days. And is there a risk that older Australians hold on to those, knowing that asset will pass on to their kids, rather than downsizing, freeing up that money, freeing up that home for younger people to buy?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. But yeah, we heard a lot on the task force about how the family home is really important to people who might have a partner at home still, or that idea that they might be still looking after their children at home, or who need sort of additional care, or that thought of even looking after your children is sort of really ingrained in people's perception of what fairness is and how their family works. So I think the task force was happy to sort of leave the family home treatment as it is.
Was that something, though, that the minister said, this is a no-go area, we're not touching the family home, it's too politically tricky?
No, the minister was very open to everything. There's some very good conversations around a lot of really tricky political things, and I think we all felt empowered to have our say on issues like the family home.
But did everyone really think that was the best way to do it? Don't touch the family home?
Yeah, it was like the report is really long. The whole sector is really complex. We discussed many different things, and when it came to the family home, it was sort of ruled out pretty quickly as something where we would try and sort of put pressure on people to use that wealth when there's other options available.
Look, finally, do you think young people think much about aged care? Should they think about it a bit more?
It comes into our lives at different points. Like, obviously, we might go see our grandparents when they're in aged care, and then when our own parents sort of get to that age where they might need to use aged care, that can be a really stressful time in sort of someone's life, and particularly with the system that's so complex about fees and funding, and like, I'm an economist, and I read how the fee structure work, and I found it way too complex. So the task force is definitely looking at making that easier, so when younger people have to think about their parents going to aged care, that's easily understandable, and we make that as less stressful as possible. In terms of our own care, I don't think we think about it that much or at all. Like, it is like 40, 50, 60 years in the future. Like, it is a long way away, but we do know that we're putting money aside for superannuation, and that we're going to use that in the future. I think what we do think about is our ability to be economically secure and grow wealth. So we sort of have this path in life that sort of most of us sort of take, where you sort of get an education, buy a home, get a good secure job, have a family, and sort of build up wealth through your sort of midlife towards retirement. I think the worry for young people is they can sort of see that pathway breaking down, and it's much harder to jump onto the prosperity or sort of wealth accumulation ladder. And a lot of young people say to us they feel like that older generations sort of pulled the prosperity ladder up behind them. So I think we don't think about aged care specifically, but in terms of that building wealth and economic security, I think we think about that element of it. And a lot of young people are really concerned about their ability to do that in the current sort of economic climate.
Well, if the problems in aged care that have been well identified by the Royal Commission can be fixed, if this sort of new funding approach can solve some of these problems, what should we envisage ideally when it comes to the aged care system of the future? What does it look like? Are we talking about more home-based care rather than a residential facility? What should we envisage?
Yes, there's a couple of elements there. There's the residential facilities, which in the future, with adequate funding, are going to be much higher quality. So sort of moving away from that sort of institutional model, sort of 4, 5, 6 people to a room, sort of a cafeteria style kind of dinner, sort of fences around the facility out in the sort of outer suburbs, disconnected from the community. Sort of moving away from that to a much higher quality residential sort of accommodation setting, and a lot of providers and sort of thinking about how to create these new models. And then the other big factor is that people want to stay at home. And the first principle of the task force was that as a society and a government, that people should be supported to stay at home as long as they can safely and as long as they want to. So really investing in the at-home care sector and being able to retrofit people's homes and provide services to them at home where they can feel safe and secure and be connected to their community. So we're expecting the use of at-home care to definitely increase into the future. And I think that's really important. That's what people want.
Well, Thomas, I really appreciate you giving me and giving us all a much better understanding of this process of the Aged Care Taskforce and some of the thinking behind the decisions that you've made, the recommendations that you've made. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Absolute pleasure, David.
And we will be discussing this further, of course, on Insiders on Sunday. Hope you can join us then. And if you've got an idea for this podcast, a topic that you'd like us to take a deep dive on, talk to an expert about, send us an email, insiders@abc.net.au. See you soon.
Making us all feel very excited about being here.